This is the fourth episode of the Outlanders Journey podcast. My name is Jay. I am the author of the Outlanders Journey.
And I am Katra Ariello, your humble narrator for this story.
For this episode, we will be going over level 2 of the Outlanders Journey. If you haven't caught up to this section yet, be sure to listen to or read the previous chapters and levels. If you're ahead of that, there's some good news that I am now releasing level 5 every Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And as usual, we are still releasing the current chapters of the audios recording every Thursday on YouTube. And then, as usual, after a few episodes have been released, I'll compile them into longer sections that will be put up on Spotify. We also have some integrations with iHeartRadio, so those should be available as well for listening.
And also, if I can just really quickly plug, the episodes of the audio narration will also be going up and being made available on the Golden Apple Audio Patreon as well, which was just recently set up by me. That's my independent audiobook production Patreon that I am setting up personally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, just as a way of both promoting my own Patreon and promoting this story, we're going to be releasing episodes there as well. So,
Yay! How exciting. I'm very happy that you have a Patreon and you have is it like a studio that you're setting up for your all your audio recordings?
I mean, I'm just recording out of my home studio, the same
Mm-hmm.
same spot that I'm actually talking to you from right now, which is just a sound treated closet basically,
Mm-hmm.
and I've got my nice microphone. I'm on a Shure MV7X for anyone out there who cares about specs. And yeah, I'm using Reaper for all of my recording. I've got some cool plugins that help me with like all of the mastering and stuff.
Yay.
It's really just I wanted to start doing more audiobooks besides just like waiting to get auditions. I know there's a lot of like independent authors like yourself, for example.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of like adjacent to the thing I'm doing with Golden Apple Audio. I'm reaching out to a lot of independent authors who have books that I really like, who don't have audiobooks made for them, and being like, hey, I would like to produce your audiobook and we'll come up with like royalty arrangements or, however, because like, making an audiobook can be expensive. So part of the goal with Patreon is basically to be able to crowdfund and make getting audiobooks more accessible for authors who should have audiobooks.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And at the bottom of this episode, we'll include links to Katra's new Patreon account. So
Hell
please
yeah.
go and support her there. Okay, so with the housekeeping in order, let's jump straight into level 2 discussions. I don't know about how you felt reading this, Katra, but for me, writing this, it felt a lot like this was probably one of the more emotional levels that I had to write. Not that the story wasn't serious until this point, but it did feel a little bit like, oh shit, just got really serious kind of
Yeah.
thing. That's how I kind of structured the level in a way.
No, there was a lot of things happening really quickly. I think we went from out of the frying pan and into the fryer situation for
Mhm.
everybody. Literally the fryer in this case. Some fireballs started getting thrown around.
Right.
It was rough. As a narrator, I really try to get into character and like embody these characters that I'm giving voices to.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. Like putting yourself in the headspace of someone like Elder Lasha,
Mhm.
the confrontation that she has at the very end of level 2 with the Aarakocra,
Mhm.
just basically being like, it's your fault that this happened to us. Like you've ushered in this age of like desolation
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And and it's just like, as an actress, as a narrator, it's like you want to make sure that you're selling that emotion of someone who is one of the respected elders of her people, who just watched like basically so many of her loved ones get wiped out again.
Mhm.
This is for the orcs, this has been one great tragedy after another basically for them.
Yeah.
And now there's only, I think, like a few dozen of them are even left at this point.
Right.
Absolute devastation.
Yeah, and it's very tough for the ones remaining because, there's a great deal of survivor's guilt. There's a great deal of like, what even do we do now? Like, is it even worth fighting for our lives at this point? But it's just a matter of like, let's just figure out what to do about winter.
Yeah.
And I think in the character of Mock and Dura, especially, Mock, in some ways, he's kind of been treated as the outcast of the group because he has these magical abilities. But
Hmm.
his brother was the only person who really believed in him and believed that this thing is less of a curse and more of a gift. And Ernog always thought that the elves are the ones who are able to defeat us with magic, then one of our own having magic might be the key to fighting back. And
Yeah.
so we get this scene in Ernog's final moments where he tells Mok that you are our future, you are our survival, and if you die, then we all die. And in some ways, this is both a source of motivation, perhaps, for Mok, but it can also be thought of like as a curse
Yeah.
because now he has a great burden on his shoulder to sort of uplift his people back.
He's just a kid,
I know,
right?
he's just a kid. The way I think about this moment is I don't know if you watched Spider-Verse, the second movie at all, but it's like sort of Mock's canon event, the moment that sort
Hmm.
of creates his story arc in a way.
Yeah. It's it's got to be rough.
Yeah.
Like, we were talking about like what this is like for Elder Lasha, who's been
Mhm.
around for so long, but you've got Mock, who basically, his role models, like the people he's looked up to basically like teach him how to live and how to be like a member of his own society. They're
Mhm.
dead, right?
Mhm.
Um and so to have like your brother, who one of the people you look up to most in this world, say, okay, it's all up to you because I'm about to die. How what does that's so much pressure for a
Mhm.
kid, like
Mhm.
and I think we see that in some of the interactions that he has with Laurel and Maya Lee after the massacre,
Mhm.
where he just sounds dead inside,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because he's still like trying to come to grips with all of this,
Yeah.
and is he even going to be able to, you
Yeah,
know
and he in some ways, he's trying to learn magic out of obligation to
Mm.
Ernog's sort of final words to him, and it just doesn't help that Elder Lasha is so against him
Yeah.
learning magic that now he's also having to deal with like, okay, well, Ernog, who's dead now, has told me to do this, and Elder Lasha is telling me not to do it, and I don't even know like what the right path is for me anymore. And in some ways, the character of Dura, whose perspective we haven't seen up until this point, you can kind of see the pressure that she is going through as well. She was betrothed to Ernog, but they hadn't married yet by this point before Ernog died. Dura is pregnant with Ernog's child, and before she let everybody know about this, Elder Lasha was trying to ascend her to the next leader position of the remaining orcs. And Dura herself also feels this intense pressure of
Yeah.
how do I live up to this? Because in many ways, both Mok and Dura very much admired Ernog's leadership, and in many ways feel like how do we fill this giant hole that Ernog left behind?
Yeah, I feel like there's this one scene where Dura she's almost essentially like, what are y'all looking at me for? I'm just the girl that Ernog liked.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. She was just trying to be like, I don't understand. Like, I don't think I qualify at all for this position.
Yeah.
And in writing the sequence of events that was happening, like the the massacre. I call it the Emerald Hollows massacre. In many ways, I'm rolling dice. I'm trying to see like which characters live, which characters don't make it, and things like that. It was quite difficult in just dealing with the sheer numbers of like, okay, well, these are orcs. They might be slightly hardier, but they are more or less commoners. Like, even if they save the dexterity saving throw against the fireball, they're pretty much dead.
Mhm.
And it's just really hard to. There was a chance I was like, oh my god, am I just gonna TPK these characters like right before the story even starts? But yeah, I wanted in many ways to just display the gravity of the situation and also just display like the full extent to which New Everlon doesn't care about them.
Yeah.
Brother Taida, his final moments, I wanted him to sort of have a redemptive moment where he's trying to like help the orcs in whatever way he can, but he still ends up dying in some ways a fool because he runs up to, the army that's clearly about to decimate everybody, and he's still thinking that he can negotiate with them. He's still trying to be like, "Hey, it's fine. Please don't hurt us. We don't want to fight you anymore." He still thinks that like New Everlon cares to some extent, and
Yeah.
that ends up being in many ways his fatal flaw.
Yeah. He's the naive fool who thinks that the system can be used in a just way if only the right words are said
Hmm.
or whatever, who still ultimately believes in a system that has decided to stop caring. I wonder
Yeah.
if there's any I wonder if there's any analogs to certain real life goings on at the moment.
Yeah. Definitely not. Definitely not. Our real
um
society would never do something like that.
Yeah, no, you'd never have people like naively thinking, no, certainly the people in power won't abuse it, hurt people indiscriminately. I'll be
Yeah.
fine. Dead.
Certainly, if like a group of people just wants a plot of land, they're not gonna just do whatever they want to get it, right? Certainly, they
Goodness,
have some morals, but mm,
goodness gracious.
yeah, this in many ways is going to become the shadow that affects all of the characters from here on out. It'll be the thing that makes everybody realize like this is the world that we're dealing with. This is the world that we are in many ways going up against, and how these characters respond and how these characters grow given these circumstances. I've been having a really fun time sort of having them grapple with all of that. Moving on to the main characters, I think it's very interesting to see now like which of these characters respond in what ways to this situation, right? In the world of writing, in many ways people say like you don't really know what your character is like until you push them against the corner, right? And then you
Yeah,
see like how they respond to pressure, right? And I think we see this most evidently in the characters of Errol and Ark. I think this is one of those moments where I was like, ooh, I can really highlight the difference between the different kinds of wisdom stats in D&D. So,
yeah.
for example, like Errol, she has high perception, and Ark has high insight. And
Hmm.
you get to really see how this plays out, right? Because Errol, she's the first person to notice that Miley's hat seems a little weird. And she's the first person to notice that there might be some sort of disguise going on.
Hmm.
But after Ark finds out, the same kind of realization, Ark ends up sort of going, oh, but she's just a kid. Ark recognizes Miley's humanity before he recognizes the fact that, oh, she's, disguising herself. So this is sort of where like that whole perception versus insight thing comes into play. Errol jumps to the complete wrong conclusion. And in many
Yeah,
ways it's caused by the stress of what just occurred, and in many ways that stress leads to like, oh, I need to blame somebody, right? So Errol immediately jumps to blaming Maya Lee and by proxy blaming Laurel as well. But
Hmm.
I think this is where we kind of showcase in some ways like perhaps, you know, there's still reasons we don't quite know, but perhaps there's a reason why the Everlight chose Arc, right? Because Arc seems to just have this innate ability to understand people in some ways and
Hmm.
to be willing to sort of see the good in everybody, which is, you know, in many ways the main tenet of the Everlight's teachings, right?
Right. I was reading through this series of chapters, the moment where the Everlight basically gives Arc basically a way to hack into to like eavesdrop on the telepathic communication that Laurel and Bach are having,
Mm-hmm.
and his realization of like, oh, they are spies too. Oh, no, these are just some kids that are in over their head and
Yeah.
they're trying to make the best of a bad situation. And actually, I'm the one who's being kind of intrusive here by even listening in on this and like not recognizing that these are just kids.
Mm-hmm.
These are just kids trying to survive. No, I was so moved by that moment in particular.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that to you during the recording of that episode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing this episode just because like it's not just like a dialogue between
A
two
chapter,
characters.
whatever.
It's like it's like Arc also being another layer within that dialogue between the two characters. And there's just another layer of like interpretation and trying to just figure out one another and stuff like that. It's still too far for any of these characters to really call themselves friends at this point. Like it's still very much Arc and Errol in one camp, and then Laurel, Bach, and Miley in one camp. But this is sort of the bridging moment between the two groups.
Yeah, like, prior to now, they've been journeying separately and they just sort of it was sort of a like when worlds collide situation
Mm-hmm.
that they both ended up with the orcs like this.
Yeah.
And yeah, so and especially because like yeah, I mean, you can totally see it from from Errol's perspective too. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, there's these other outsiders who are lying
Yeah.
about who they are
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of this great tragedy that's going on, this massacre, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, well, how could this have happened? How could they have found us? Well, there's these outsiders that we know are lying to us about who they are. I mean, I think she's totally justified in her suspicions,
Right.
and yeah, it is just sort of it's the circumstances of well, no, they were doing that for their own safety because like they're genuinely trying to escape from a very like evil person.
Right. Right.
Um
Yeah. This is one of those moments where it's like you're reading a story and you're like, God, if they just sat down and talked to each other, none of this would have
yeah.
happened. But
If they well, I mean that's sort of a little bit of what you get with the scene with Ark listening
mm-hmm.
into Laurel and Bach is you kind of do get that, oh, I suddenly have insight that is absolutely necessary for me to have that I wouldn't have otherwise had,
Yes.
and that would have like been feeding into this, conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think you went about that in a really cool, really smart way, with having Arc be able to get this kind of peek behind the curtain essentially
Mm-hmm.
and go, "Oh, so that's what this all is. Okay. I understand now." And he's able to then like diffuse Errol after that and be like, "No, they're good. We
Yeah.
don't need to be suspicious of them."
Yeah.
Except maybe they do because because Laurel's still keeping secrets.
Yes, yes. And I think it's important to like bring up the fact that like in some ways you can say that like everything that Errol did was understandable, but she still made a mistake. But then you look at it
Mhm.
from Laurel's perspective, and Laurel's just doing all these things that are just not helping their side at all. Laurel given I'm gonna use she her pronouns for Laurel given, you know, that
Oh, right,
yeah,
of course.
by the end of the levels, we kind of learn more about what her sort of gender identity is. But Laurel is very much somebody who, given her upbringing, has been taught to just not trust other people. The only people you trust is yourself and your family. And Laurel doesn't really have family out here, but her closest family is Bach and Maya Lee, and she wants to protect them. But in many
Yeah.
ways, she doesn't even trust them because she doesn't believe that they can handle knowing that Sanos is actually alive. And so she would rather just take on this burden herself.
Yeah, she's got a bit of like a savior complex almost
Mhm.
in this regard. And it's I mean, I love you, girl, but you're playing with fire. And I mean, we just have to think back to her last interactions with Sanos, right? Like,
Mhm.
she's trying to go at this alone against someone who has overpowered her in the past. She's just as much, well, maybe not just as much, but she's also one of Sanos's victims, right?
Mhm.
And I think there's a level where, it seems like she's not really necessarily reconciling with that. Yeah, she thinks she's trying to take on all of this responsibility herself and shoulder all of these burdens in a way that's just hurting her, and it's hurting her found family.
Yes.
Because you've got poor Bach, who is like, having these visions of Sanos, and like Laurel's essentially gaslighting Bach right
Mhm.
now. Like,
Mhm.
oh no, you're just imagining it. It's not real. Like, there's a level where you can say like, okay, well, Laurel, if you'd be honest with Bach and Miley, like, we can maybe make this better. We can maybe like do this in a more like healthy way.
Right.
We can maybe confront this issue in a way that's actually going to make this better for everyone,
Mhm.
instead of just trying to pretend like, oh no, I alone can fix it. Like, no, Laurel, you can't. You really, really, really can't.
Yeah. Laurel is, we've seen this behavior in her from as early as level 0. She has this,
Hmm.
like you call it, the savior complex. She has this need to just take on everything herself, and she thinks that she alone can just, think her way out of it and fix it. And the only person she might ask for help at this point is her brother. And then we've also seen in situations where she did try to reach out, for example, to her almost love interest Amena for help, and that completely backfired on her. And so in many
Yeah.
ways she just has this constant like feedback loop of like, okay, I should just fix this myself. Oh, let me try asking somebody, and then it just kind of, it backfires. And so she just goes, okay, no, I'm just going to stick to doing this on my own. And it's just this habit, this very, very bad habit of her is, perhaps in her own head she justifies it morally because she's like, oh well, like, I'm doing this for their sake, I'm doing this, to help them, and not realizing that she is actually causing a lot of harm to the very people that she's trying to protect. In some ways, I don't want to do this like to too much, but in some ways there's like some parallels between Laurel's behavior and Sanos's behavior from the
Hmm.
past. And we see this especially in how this manifests for Bach. Like you said, Laurel is essentially gaslighting Bach at this point. And
Hmm.
this is just another echo of what Bach had to go through under Sanos. Bach was basically told his whole life that these feelings, these instincts, these, the discomfort that he feels, all of these things are just in his own head, and everything's actually peachy good. And in many ways, Laurel's just doing the same thing to him. And
Yep.
it's just, it is very difficult to, well, both to write this, but also to just like kind of experience this through Bach's perspective, right?
Yeah. And Maya Lee's perspective too.
Mm-hmm.
Maya Lee is so shut out from both Laurel and Bach that she's just essentially feeling abandoned by the two people that she is relying on most for survival in this world right
Mm-hmm.
now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we see that reflected in a lot. Like, oh well, clearly I must be the problem. Clearly they're like trying to get rid of me.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want me around, and it's just, I think it's sort of like it's some of her own like worst fears and anxieties are being realized because like Laurel and Laurel and even Bach, like Bach's not innocent in this.
Mhm.
Like they're both keeping secrets from Miley,
Mhm.
ostensibly for her protection, but again, it's just hurting her. It's
Yeah.
making her feel like she's the one who's the problem, like she's at fault.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I think children have this very because children live in a world where like they don't fully understand how the world works. Um
yep,
I think children have a tendency to try to fill in the gaps with answers themselves, right?
yeah,
And children do have a tendency to blame themselves when they don't have an answer. Oh, like, why are mom and dad fighting and they're not going to tell me why? It must be because of something I did. And we're seeing this in Maya Lee, where she knows that she was the person who revealed her identity. She knows that, Errol just blamed her for everything. She watched and with her own eyes Laurel almost, dying as a result of that. And so, very logically from a child's perspective, she puts two and two get together and she says, it's all my fault. I
yep.
I did all of this. And then it just doesn't help that Laurel and Bach just no longer talk to her about all of these, important matters. And she's just feeling like, oh no, I just, and at this point, similar to Bach, Miley doesn't really remember her past because of, Sanos's mind altering tinkering. So we actually don't know why, her family's not here. Why doesn't she have like family looking for her in the same way that like we don't know where Bach's family is? And so,
Yeah,
we have all these layers of like Miley having been potentially abandoned by other family members as well.
certainly. And like you can imagine like that's largely what Sanos was like telling Bach all the time. You can imagine there's likely a similar level of like what was being done to Miley, like, oh, you're here because, you know, you were bad, right?
Mhm.
She was also being abused by Sanos
Mhm.
and like we know how Sanos gets on and how Sanos manipulates his victims.
Mhm.
He's basically, you know, this type to set himself up as like a you know, the comparisons with Laurel are apt. Like Sanos is the no, I am the only one who loves you. I'm the only one who cares about you, even
Mhm.
as I'm hurting you.
Yeah.
Right? I'm the only one who can make it better,
Mhm.
even as I'm actively making it worse.
Yeah.
And it is just she's got this found family that's now icing her out.
Mhm.
And what does that do to a kid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What does that do to a kid who's already been abused
Mhm.
and seemingly, you know, abandoned and has no other family? Like she's alone in a world of strangers, basically.
Yeah.
She's the only wood elf. Take a second to like acknowledge like she's the only wood elf here.
Mhm. Mhm.
There is no one here that even looks like her.
Mhm.
She's been having to disguise herself and like maintain this fiction and then like that ended up failing
Mhm.
and she was disguising herself because Laurel told her to.
Mhm.
Like, you know, this was necessary. This was a thing they had to do, and like now it's just it's blowing up,
Mhm.
and now Laurel and Bach aren't talking to her, and like so who can she even talk to about anything?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so devastating for a child to have to go through all of this. And again, it's like we've kind of looked through all of these characters' perspectives, and in many ways, like every single character that we've been following, we're like, it makes sense why they're doing this. It makes perfect sense, like
Hmm.
uh, like for me it's like I don't want Laurel to like come off as a monster. I want Laurel to really like be genuine and that Laurel really thinks that she's doing the right thing for them. But I also want it to be very clear that like from Bach and Miley's perspective they are hurting a lot as a result. But you still like look at Laurel with a great deal of empathy and you're like, okay, you're also just a dumb kid, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So, this level has ended on quite a tense note, between all of the characters. There's a lot of things that are brewing, and we don't really know how this is going to play out as they go on. But for the time being, they did make it to the forest. So we'll see where things go from there, and if any of these relationships can sort of resolve themselves, if they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Poor Ark. We get a little bit like, I don't think we mentioned this in the notes, but
Mm-hmm.
there is just, he's the confrontation at the very end with the Aarakocra, and they're like icing them out like, no, screw y'all, you can't come in.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly they're like, wait, oh my god, you're Coney. Oh, but you're famous. Oh, everybody look, it's a famous guy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like everybody's suddenly like starstruck, and he just has to like deal with this shame that like he's being recognized as this famous acrobat who's now disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Um
Mm-hmm.
and there's a level of like, oh my god, poor buddy, like, oh, the
Yeah.
turmoil that Ark is going through right now. Yeah, because he's been dealing with this for as long as he has, but like I think finally there's just a level of like shock when
Mm-hmm.
he gets back to his homeland, and it's like, oh, I have to climb a ladder now.
Yeah.
I could fall off of this platform and die,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's suddenly like he feels like a stranger who can't even survive in his own homeland anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because like the Aarakocra certainly aren't like very, helpful for Aarakocra with disabilities.
Yeah.
They don't seem to have any kind of I mean, I guess it would be the ADA, the Aarakocra Disabilities Act. I guess, I suppose they don't have one of those.
Yeah, yeah. I've been hinting at it for quite some time, but there's quite a lot of ableism within the Aarakocra community. There
Yeah,
is,
it's
yeah, yeah. There's just this sense of like, if you can't fly, then you can't be in this society, right?
yeah.
And
I think you showcase that really well with
mm-hmm,
the fact that, oh yeah, okay, whatever, here's a rope ladder or whatever, and it's like, of course it's like old and rotten and breaks the first time somebody tries to use it, because it's like they're not maintaining this stuff.
yeah,
They're not maintaining this infrastructure for people who don't have the ability to fly, because they don't care.
yeah,
Because like if you can't fly, you're not even a person worth caring about.
exactly.
um and so this is especially like shocking, and like, I mean, you really can understand why Ark is feeling so like ashamed, because this is a culture that he was brought up in. These are things that he never had to think about
Mm-hmm,
before, and suddenly he's being confronted with like, oh, this is bad. That I am, so of course he's having these feelings of like feeling worthless now,
mm-hmm.
because that's how the society he was brought up in treated people that are in the kind of situation he's in now.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it really doesn't help that like Arc up until this point was seen as like the pinnacle of like athleticism, right? And
Hmm.
then he goes from that to not even registering as a person in his society, right?
Yep.
And that is a hard, hard pill for him to swallow. Um,
Yep.
the rope ladder thing, I came up with that concept after I took like a disabilities course in college, where my professor, she was complaining nonstop about our university's like, so our one of our halls in our university has this like big massive like marble staircase that you have to climb up to even enter into the building, kind of thing. And
Hmm.
then like there is a ramp on the side, but it's like very narrow and it's like very poorly constructed. And like it's just, when she brought that up, I was just like, yeah, that is true. It's like one of those things that like if you're able-bodied and you can climb those stairs, you're just never going to think about it. And then
Yep.
for somebody who has to use a wheelchair or can't really climb stairs, it becomes just like this extra thing that you have to like be stressed about in order to like go to class, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted that to kind of be showcased in this situation where like the Aarakocra are like, oh yeah, yeah, just come up and we'll have a discussion, kind of thing. And then Ark suddenly has to think about like the mechanics of how do I get up there, something that he's never had to think about until this moment. there's a lot of big changes happening for all of these characters, and yeah. The last thing I wanted to just go over is Laurel and her relationship with her gender. I've mentioned this. I think Laurel mentioned this in her dialogue with Bach, where she was saying, like, changelings back in the day, they could just shapeshift into, any form, any gender that they wanted to. And
Mhm.
the changelings of now are just like, I'm going to stick to one thing, and that's going to just be my identity my whole life because that's what keeps us safe.
Yeah.
And Laurel has talked about how much she struggles with that. She can't just stick to one form or one set identity. And she feels, in many ways, like she's a broken person as a result of that. But really,
Yeah.
what she is, gender fluid, right? Like,
Yeah.
and that's a totally normal thing for her to experience. But she doesn't necessarily have the language to like express like why just sticking to one identity is so tough for her. She just thinks of herself as like, there's something wrong with me. All the
Yeah.
other changelings around me can do it. Why can't I? Right?
Yeah. But then of course you have Bach come in, the goat, the MVP,
Hmm.
just like, yeah, I like you if you're girl Laurel or boy Laurel. You
Yeah,
could be whatever.
exactly.
Like MVP ally over here. But then again, it seems like Bach might have something some gender feels going on as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's
You
some
kind of
hints
hint at
there.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, this feels a lot like sort of two potentially closeted people not having the language to really discuss what's going on and just trying to use, the language that they do have to explain it to one another.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, this is going to be further development going on. We're going to see, how Laurel's sort of gender performance, gender identity, all of these things will like continue to play out. And then I don't know, maybe keep an eye on Bach and see what he's going through too.
I'm excited. I hope everybody listening is excited.
Yeah.
Because I'm the narrator. I'm also just a huge fan of this story. So like, um, I'm 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 pleased as punch that I get to be involved with this project.
Oh,
Because all these characters are so fun.
yeah.
And I have so much. I get so much joy out of bringing them to life.
And honestly, the story wouldn't come to life without your voices for all of these
Oh,
characters.
thank you.
Yeah, you really made level 2 feel so much more alive. And I mean all of the levels, but level 2 with like I think it was chapter 4. No, it was chapter 5. It was the chapter that was from all of the orcs' perspectives, and that one was so emotional for me listening to. I really loved
Hmm.
it.
Well, I'm glad.
All right, I think that wraps up level 2. To close out, we usually have our, book, movie, TV, music, media recommendations. So, Katra, what do you have for us today?
I have two. I
Mm-hmm.
have a book recommendation and a music recommendation. So the book recommendation I want to make is my wonderful girlfriend, Talia Bhatt.
Mm-hmm.
She just had a book come out called that's a collection of trans feminist essays that she's written over the past year or so. This has been a project that's been a kind of a long time in the making now,
Mm-hmm.
and this book is just a collection of the essays that she's written. It's called Trans Radfem. It's absolutely excellent. I think it's like topping a lot of the like Amazon, like feminist literature like charts and stuff right now. It's
Oh,
great.
wow.
If you're up for reading some good feminist theory in this time of masculine supremacist like ascendancy, the Andrew Tates of the world
Oh,
like
mm,
are just like really culturally ascendant at this moment, and gosh, we could just use some really good feminism.
yeah.
um this book is that, and I think that part of the reason why it's resonating with so many people so much, like I think I was talking to her the other day. I think the book sold like 1,000 copies already. It's been out for a week.
Oh, wow.
It's Yeah, no, it's doing gangbusters because I think there's a need, there's like a yearning for this kind of analysis that she does in
Yeah.
this book.
Yeah.
So yeah, have to recommend that. Trans Radfem by Talia Bhatt. Check it out. For music, I want to highlight a newer band in the Brooklyn punk scene called Goof Goblin. I think I've talked before about my like love of like, trans queer punk music, and Goof Goblin was started up recently by two of the members of another band that I'm a huge fan of called Sludge Bunny.
Mm.
Sludge Bunny is breaking up. That was just announced recently, so very sad about that.
Oh.
But two of the members from Sludge Bunny, along with one of their other friends, put this new band together called
Mhm.
Goof Goblin, and they do a lot of like. There's a lot of like video game references in their music. And just check them out on Spotify. They're great. Goof Goblin, check them out. I love them. They're fantastic.
Mm.
If you're in or around Brooklyn, go to one of their shows. You're gonna have a great time. I promise.
Awesome. These are great recommendations. And honestly, I too feel like there's not enough good like feminist literature out there.
Hmm.
So I will definitely check that out. I'm looking forward to it.
It's gonna be getting an audiobook version too. Can you guess who's gonna be narrating it?
Oh, okay, okay. All right, I'm looking forward to that as well. On my end, my recommendation is the movie Perfect Days by
Ooh.
Wenders. I watched this over like the holiday break, and I think this is probably my favorite movie that I've seen in the past year or so. Perfect Days is about a a public toilet cleaner in Tokyo,
Okay.
and that's just all he does. The movie just follows his day to day routine where he wakes up in the morning, he brushes his teeth, he gets into his truck and drives to all the designated public toilets in Tokyo where he cleans and scrubs the toilet very, very dutifully. And
Mm-hmm.
it, there's something about it that really just, it feels calming. Maybe it was like the right
Okay.
time for me to watch it, but you really get to see just like the glimpses of his humanity as well as the humanity of all the people that he gets to sort of run into. There's all these like little moments that just kind of stick with you. Like for example, somebody leaves like a little tic-tac-toe board in one of the bathrooms and
Oh.
is expecting somebody to like play with them, right? And so he was deciding, oh, do I recycle this piece of paper or do I keep it? And he ends up playing the game with whoever left behind this little tic-tac-toe sheet of paper. And
That's so
it's
cool.
really wholesome, and I wouldn't necessarily say the movie itself is, like, super, super wholesome. You get hints at, like, some sort of, you know, more traumatic past perhaps that the main character has gone through. He
Yeah.
has a run-in with, like, a family member where you kinda get hints at, like, "Oh, there something has happened." But the movie is just so good at, like, not telling you what's going on, and you just have to read between the lines, see what their facial expressions are sort of indicating, and then the life moves on. He says goodbye to this family member, and then he goes back to cleaning toilets, and it's another perfect day after another perfect day, basically.
Yeah. That sounds really cool. I definitely have to check this out.
It ended up being very moving for me, so I would definitely recommend this to anyone. All right. That is it for our fourth episode of this podcast. Thank you so much, Katra, for joining me, as always. I look forward to listening to even more recordings from you. So, uh,
Absolutely.
yeah. All right.
Thank you for having me again.
Mm-hmm. All right.
And thank you all for listening.
Yes. Thank you all for listening. Bye bye.
Bye.